from Migration Consortium, and we are the Polish partner of ODI Humanitarian Policy Group regarding this project. So from now on, because we have a lot to discuss and only 1 hour. So I wanted just to share with you that the topic that we'll discuss today is based on the research we conducted for last more than a year with, actually 2 years, like more than 1.5 years, with ODI Humanitarian Policy Group, that is the London-based think tank that conducts humanitarian analysis and political analysis. And we will focus on the narratives. So on humanitarian narratives, so in the short version, the stories that actors or humanitarian actors of response create and reinforce to motivate or to justify some of their decisions. In this context, I will present a little bit about our findings from Poland, Maryana a little bit of findings from Ukraine, and we are very, very happy to, and we'll probably also discuss topics such as localization, such as exceptionalism, such as standards of response, neutrality, humanitarian principles. But we encourage you strongly to read the report. It's already available in the Polish version, I think also in Ukrainian already, or no? Not yet, but soon. It's already available in the Polish version, and I sent you nevertheless, I sent you the English version to the chat. Okay, let's start then. And thank you very much for connecting with us in the middle of the day on Thursday. Actually, I wanted to ask you, Maryana, at the very beginning, what for you from your 2 years project, how would you define the humanitarian narrative? And maybe you have the practical example of what humanitarian narrative is or is not.
Yeah, I admire your moderation moves, Sarian. That was unexpected, as I was planning to listen to your presentation on Polish narratives, but well, I will jump in. So yes, in this research, we were talking about narratives, which may sound from the very beginning as a bit vague research topic. We defined for ourselves narratives as stories that are being told by different actors about the response in Ukraine and the whole framing those stories are making to the response. At the end, I must say for this research, the narratives became very, very practical and the implications also became very practical. Maybe a very broad conclusion which can start our presentation would be that narratives have a huge impact on the humanitarian work, humanitarian actors, or all the actors engaged in humanitarian response, like international organizations, donors, government, local actors, are creating or reproducing certain narratives that are influencing decision-making. And today we will be talking probably, Sarian, about a lot about solidarity. And now we can see how easily the narratives or how vulnerable the narratives are and how easily they can shift. This is exactly what we observe right now around USAID freeze in the countries, in Poland and Ukraine, but also more broader political narratives that US as a state is now constructing around the war in Ukraine and around the response, around the support to humanitarian actors, around humanitarian presence and work of US in different countries. So I must say that it's really like pity to say, but now we see how the narratives can be easily reframed and what huge impact they have on the response and on the, I mean, the response is only one part. At the end, they have impact on people's lives in the countries we will be talking about.
Thank you very much. And I definitely agree. I will also say some words about the when we started this project, to be honest, there was very little discussion about narratives. I think from our perspective, even when we joined this project, we didn't expect that it will be so relevant 2 years on, that actually narratives will be the reasons why funds are cut down or partners are leaving or engaging. And I think this was, yeah, from our perspective, this was the research that was completely unexpected. To be honest, we didn't expect that those results will be so crucial in our work right now, and unfortunately, how prophetic it will be. That, for example, the narratives that we are just starting to discover like a year ago, such as like anti-refugee sentiments, compassion fatigue, double humanitarian standards, we started analyzing them, but they felt, I would say, very, in a way, like a soft power, like something very, not very tangible. While right now, this is the component that actually decides on to be or not to be of the local partners or international partners and their justification of their presence in this humanitarian landscape. Just to say that if you have any questions, there will be, at the end of our meeting, there will be space for questions, but also feel free to write them down in the chat. So I wanted maybe to go to the next question. Maryana, from your perspective, or I can also answer first if you want. Is it okay? I wanted to ask you, Maryana, what, from your perspective, which narratives emerged from the research that we've done, especially in the Ukrainian context? What are the key narratives that you could say that were maybe surprising or like practically prevalent?
I can't say that we, let's say, figure out some very surprising narratives, but for Ukraine, there are really three strong and very impactful narratives that were in place when we started the research in 2023, 2024, and right now they are still present, and the debates around those narratives are not calming down, let's say. So the first narrative would be the narrative that we share with this Polish case is the narrative about localization. From one side, the international community is telling that Ukrainian civil society, Ukraine's response in a broader scale, also what is happening in neighboring countries like Poland and Romania, is a success story for localization, and localization already happened here because of this active uprise and active involvement of local civil society in Ukraine and the countries that are around Ukraine. On the other hand, we definitely see a counter narrative that is spread by the civil society itself in Ukraine, and also what I know in Poland as well, is that yes, local actors are engaged into the response, but we can't say that localization is happening, the real localization. For Ukraine, there is a lot of frustration for local organizations around this not complete localization, because of the localization being presented as a formal requirement for international organizations by donors. So everyone needs to have a Ukrainian partner, and this is already treated as a checkpoint for, or check mark for, project being localized. The, let's say, other narrative that is present in Ukraine is, and connected to localization, is the narrative about the exceptional crisis and exceptional response. And there are a lot of sub-narratives related to that, the narrative of Ukrainian both people and civil society and government being strong and resistant, and that's why it creates exceptional context for action, but also the exceptional situation of a clear aggressor and a clear victim, and the for sure the exceptional scale of the response and the support and solidarity from the partner countries. And probably the final strong narrative or discussion around narrative that is present in Ukraine, and it feels like it will be dominant for the next period of time, is this narrative about neutrality and impartiality, which needs to be present in the humanitarian response. However, we can see that, first of all, the partner countries have a very strong political stance in Ukraine, so the European Union, European countries, also US and other partner countries in Ukraine. We can also say that everyone who is working in Ukraine, is it the Ukrainian actor, international actor, local staff of international organizations, they can't disaggregate or somehow split their living experience in the country and living through the attacks with their humanitarian identity. So it's really complicated conversation how people in the country can be neutral experiencing the war on their own lives. Yeah, and of course, the other thing that is being debated around the neutrality is that the core of the neutrality of humanitarian response is to ensure that humanitarian actors can have access to specific people or specific territories. And now that is not happening. The access question is a frustration for everyone in Ukraine, for international actors, Red Cross, donors, government. The occupied territories are not accessible for humanitarian actors. And then there is a question arising, what for should we be neutral and stick to the humanitarian principle of neutrality and impartiality, as it is not providing any benefits for the response right now. So these are the debates that are around the three strong narratives in Ukraine. We also noticed the narrative of recovery and a bit of the move from humanitarian response to a long-term support and rebuilding of Ukraine. But I must say that this narrative is, it was quite strong in 2023, at the end of 2023, 2024. Now it's not as strong as we observed it previously. Over to you, Sarian.
Thank you very much. I will maybe start with answering Marta's question about methodology, because that's true. I can only say that we used the study itself. Everything is in the report. The study itself is based on 3 case studies from UK, Poland, and Ukraine. So in the way, we are on different stages of response. Our role is very different. But also we have a very different, I would say, tenure of humanitarian experience, which is quite crucial because, for example, in our case, this is our first humanitarian crisis that we are directly affected with, while actually facing 2 humanitarian crises at the same time, while never before we had experience like that. While in context of Ukraine, this is of course the experience since 2014. And in the context of UK, this is mostly the context of donors and indirect response, but with many years of experience of creating this humanitarian framework. So within those 3 case studies, we used the tool called SenseMaker. We analyzed over 500 responses from very diverse spectrum of respondents, mostly from refugees themselves, but also from those who provided assistance. It also varied based on our sample. So for example, in the Polish case, those were mostly people providing assistance. In some cases, refugees who were then engaged in providing assistance. In the context of Ukraine, it was mostly IDPs and refugees, right?
Maybe I will add here just to give clarity
yes.
to the sample. So we collected data from so we conducted key informant interviews, and this were mostly
over
stakeholders.
80.
Yes, and this were mostly like stakeholders who are somehow engaged into the response, either Ukrainian NGOs or Polish NGOs, international NGOs, media representatives, government. So in the 3 countries, this were different, let's say, a profile of the stakeholders we interviewed. And then with, as Sarian mentioned, with this more, let's say, quantitative approach, collecting responses online via SenseMaker tool. This is an online tool. You're right. So in Ukrainian case, there were mostly people affected by the war, differently internally displaced people, refugees, people living in communities close to frontline. And in a UK case, there were also mostly Ukrainians who moved to UK as refugees, and hosts who were hosting or supporting Ukrainians in UK and in Poland. Sarian mentioned mostly those who provided assistance. Over to you, Sarian.
Yes. So in the context of narratives, for example, Poland, where, oh, thank you. Do you hear me well? Sorry, do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
1 second. Okay, thank you. So in the context of Poland, the narratives, there are some narratives that we shared with our colleagues from Ukraine, mostly the narratives of exceptionalism and localization. There are some that we didn't really had, mostly regarding the neutrality, impartiality. I would say they were in another way. They were presented in our research in another way, mostly as narratives on double humanitarian standards and different approaches and a little bit of like rationalization of the response. And another narrative that I think was quite prevalent in both cases was solidarity, this kind of overall narrative of solidarity and exceptional solidarity that we managed to unpack. And exactly as Maryana mentioned, this was quite interesting in the way, because there was this very yes, the link is before. I will send it again. So for us, for example, this narrative of exceptional solidarity, exceptional mobilization of Polish state was a tricky one, because we try to unpack who is actually engaged and who is not in this response. What makes this crisis so exceptional? In the context of Poland, what we had were 2 parallel humanitarian crises, one at the Polish-Belarusian border, one at the Polish-Ukrainian border, which were treated differently. Not only refugees themselves were treated differently at one border, mostly facing hostility and hospitality on another border. The scale was completely different. The scale of the funds that were, the support that they gained was different, but also even those individuals who were assisting were treated differently in the political narratives. And this is quite something that, you know, when we investigated, that was interesting. But not, we didn't expect that it will escalate that strongly within next half a year. So right now, even today, we discussed at the UNHCR meeting, we discussed the narratives that make some legal changes, revoking the right to asylum, taking a step back from assistance to Ukrainians as well, as the narratives that are constructed on purpose, and how those double standards, but also these exit strategies, is actually fueled by those narratives. There is this question that I wanted to ask you, but this time I will answer first. Is this crisis exceptional? Is this response exceptional? And when you look at the numbers, it is. When you look at the funds that were engaged and the mobilization of the public opinion, yes, Ukrainian response was exceptional. The mobilization of civil society was exceptional. But what we managed to unpack is that the engagement of actors that were active within the Polish response was very uneven. So the overall narrative of solidarity was that everyone helps. Well, actually, there were some who were helping, but they were invisible. For example, Ukrainian community and diaspora that was already present in Poland. There were some actors who we didn't expect within this solidarity, such as private sector or religious communities or other migrant-led organizations, that they just appeared and actively engaged in the response. And there are some actors who I would say kind of melted this narrative of solidarity for the political purposes, such as also as we saw during the elections, the parliamentary elections in Poland in October last year. So where this we help, we are in solidarity with Ukraine, has been in the ways instrumentalized in some ways, while actually the engagement of state actors, when you see in the numbers, when you see the scale of financial engagement, it is quite interesting when you see that United States was financially more present in this response in Poland only than Polish state itself. So you see how this narrative was, I would say, collective for all the actors, while there was some discrepancies among them. So, for example, the state, in the context of state, it was mostly local authorities were first-hand respondents. So in some ways, this crisis, this response for us was exceptional because it was the first humanitarian response apart from Polish-Belarusian border that we participated in. But at the very same time, we see the traps. After 3 years, we see right now we have the 3rd anniversary of Russian invasion to Ukraine, a full-scale war. And we see the traps behind this narrative of like, we all help, we are all in solidarity with Ukraine. And I wanted to go back to you, Maryana. From your perspective, from this research, do you feel this response was exceptional?
I already touched a bit upon that. So for sure, it's quite similar to what you shared about Poland. So the scale of the humanitarian need as a consequence of the full-scale invasion and full-scale war, that's for sure exceptional. Ukraine is a huge country, and the front line is huge. The level of the combat, it's really something exceptional also for this part of the world, but also globally. I must say that this need that was a consequence of the war, or as a consequence of the war, is really unprecedented. The level of support and solidarity in the country and the bottom-up movement, it was also exceptional and unprecedented. So how the society was mobilized and is mobilizing right now is something new and what's never happened in Ukraine as in the country, and probably is one of the examples of how local society or society in general can mobilize in response to such kind of invasion, or as in response to the war. You mentioned this gap between different actors being involved, and that's probably also an exceptional thing, as in the first months of the response, Ukrainian actors, informal groups, volunteers were those who were responding, and then international community came in and built its work and structures on what's already existed. It's not broadly recognized, unfortunately, till now, that the swift mobilization of the society in the country and also on the borders of the societies in neighboring countries. That was something that actually helped to stabilize the humanitarian situation, and then only the international actors came in. So from my perspective, that's also exceptional ignorance of local efforts, which now is somehow forgotten after already within this massive structure of traditional humanitarian assistance that is built in Ukraine. The other exceptional thing that is not in the report, but that I also must underline is the variety of humanitarian initiatives, projects, responders that are in Ukraine right now. For example, only with cash assistance, we have more than 100 actors acting in Ukraine. We have all the different types of responses, from very bureaucratically structured and systemized to really like locally led initiatives, which are still behind of the attention of this traditional system. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And actually, I have another question to you, exactly connected to what you said. I wanted to ask you, what are the, from your perspective, you mentioned already some of them, but what are the implications of the narratives on humanitarian response in Ukraine? Like, what are the practical implications that those narratives generate in the Ukrainian context? What do you think?
Yeah, maybe I will start with a very broad practical implication that I think we wanted to highlight on a top line level with our report, is that humanitarian actors, especially those who have power in the form of money and being able to take decisions and influence political decisions, they are creating narratives. So that needs to be recognized and needs to be reiterated. And behind that, there is a huge level of responsibility. So for actors like state, for actors like international organizations and donors, they need to also understand for themselves that everything that they are telling, the stories, the comments, they are producing narratives that are influencing people on the ground. Maybe a couple of examples. We have this part of the study which is related to how Ukrainians as beneficiaries of the response are depicted, either as those who are super resilient or those who are super vulnerable. So this is an example of how the narrative, for example, of Ukrainians being resistant practically influences that many of groups of people inside the country are being overlooked by the actors, especially, for example, those frontline responders who are local, who represent local communities and are not professional employees of humanitarian organizations. So their needs for mental health support, their humanitarian needs, their financial needs are overlooked because of this picture of or image of resistors to the crisis, and that they are capable to be self-sufficient and support themselves. However, in this protracted long run, it's not something that is possible. We hear from organizations on the ground how partners from outside the country barely understand the dynamics inside, how people can function, for example, after a 10-hour air raid in the night and then go to their works and support others and provide humanitarian assistance. So this is only one example. We have some more in the report, but I also want to hand over and to talk about also the Polish case a bit.
Thank you very much. Maybe I will actually surprisingly say a little bit more about UK case, because the implications on this is mostly affect, for us, this was our first lesson of localization. I think localization is something that, yeah, generally for us, it was, as I mentioned, the first humanitarian experience apart from the Polish-Belarusian border. We could observe different level of engagement on different actors. And for us, it was also the first time we kind of learned the humanitarian vocabulary and also the humanitarian dynamics of the crisis. That, for example, the what exit strategy of INGOs leaving or reducing their engagement, their financial support, what does it mean? Where is the decision-making process? Where does it happen? And this practically UK research was mostly about it, but for us, what we saw were the consequences. And this decision-making process would not be, I would say that, I don't want to say smooth, but this engagement, this unprecedented support would not be able, if not those prevailing narratives that this crisis is special, it is exceptional, but also this narrative that is under it, which is familiarity, which is kind of neighborhood. In Poland, it was very present that we are in this together. The temporary directive, the decisions on temporary directive on temporary protection to Ukrainians, the decision was made before the EU kind of created the mechanism themselves. It was already implemented in Poland. It was very present first 2 years that we are kind of neighboring countries against the same enemy. And this is something that is, I would say, very tricky when it comes to the humanitarian principles. Because within the humanitarian principles, those principles of neutrality and impartiality, for those humanitarian actors was very difficult for the local actors to combine with the obvious, I would say, political enemy that Russia or Belarus became, with this public image that is, Cold War 2.0, or this kind of like Europe against the Russia or the regime. So it was very difficult to kind of like have those two colliding, conflicted narratives on like neutrality, impartiality that justify the presence of humanitarian actors and give them credibility with, for example, the obvious engagement in one side of the conflict. And another aspect of this was also no, I will not tell about this because we don't have that much time. But another aspect is, for example, how the narrative was possible because of this solidarity and because of showing how people are reacting. And the practical implication, unfortunately, of this narrative is the compassion fatigue and humanitarian fatigue. And the rise of anti-refugee and anti-Ukrainian sentiments that happens. And this is something that narrative is very powerful with. Because at the beginning in CBO's survey was showing that 94% of citizens of Poland support Ukraine or are in solidarity with Ukraine. Right now, it's around 40%. So around every third person says that we should support Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. Not even speaking about non-Ukrainian refugees, because those double standards were very present also about refugees from Ukraine who, for example, are Roma or third country nationals. So as you see this strong narrative of solidarity, it is selective. This is one thing, but also it created this justification for state not to engage to some level because the civil society and local organizations can take over with the support of international organization. So right now we are in the third year with the exit strategy, with US aid freezing, and we kind of come back to the discussion with the state that Polish state should take responsibility for this response, this protracted conflict. And unfortunately, at this moment, the narrative is completely different and practically hindering the humanitarian action that we have in play, because the political narrative is that actually we shouldn't support the state narrative. We shouldn't support that much the refugees because the new narrative is the narrative of securitization. of security of the state, of sovereignty. And unfortunately, with this narrative in hand, we have very little, as civil society organizations, we have very little cards to play. So it is interesting. This is a very practical implication because the organizations who are tired, who are exhausted, so the first responders who are exhausted, cannot really anymore that much engage as they were able to do it in first months. Such solidarity would not happen again. I think this is a very maybe strong statement, but we had these questions lately within one interview. Do you think something like that could happen again? And from my perspective, from the research that we've done, it wouldn't be possible because of this aspect of political reality, political narrative that has changed, but also the capacity of the civil society who can no longer maintain this narrative of solidarity with Ukraine. So we are in a different place. I think this is a very strong implication that we see how narratives play and how narratives shift and how narrative impact the political decision making within the state actors and INGOs as well. Sorry, that was quite. I wanted to ask you, Maryana, then maybe something positive, huh? Let's discuss some positive sides. Do you think there are some learning opportunities we could have for future humanitarian action? Do you see something like that from the research that we've done? For humanitarian actors, maybe international actors.
I think we are now in the moment of the history when it's a bit challenging to look for something good and positive. So not really so much to say, but yeah, maybe as a learning, again, getting back to those two central narratives that were super relevant to Ukraine. The narrative of localization. So the learning is that international actors need to take the localization seriously, and definitely the potential that is in the countries is underutilized, and the humanitarian response, if the international partners took the localization seriously, the end beneficiaries, the people, could benefit more on engaging local actors to the response. So that is a learning that needs to be unpacked for other crises for sure. On a less positive note, the learning would be that for those who have power in taking decisions on localization, it's not easy task to give up those powers and to shift the powers to local actors. So this is something that is not happening so easy. And after just claiming we have a successful localization here in this country. So we are 3 years after the response, and in Ukraine, localization is still a very challenging task that everyone is working on. So that's for sure. For the neutrality part, I would say that this is also the learning that the humanitarian principles are important, and they allow humanitarian actors to do what they do. But in every case, the principles should be nuanced and should be discussed with local actors. A very simple example that we now have in Ukraine is a humanitarian support to ex-combatants in Ukraine who are now outside the attention of humanitarian actors, but they have a humanitarian need. They are not in the same position as combatants and ex-combatants in other more typical crises where international community was engaged. Those people are primarily, they are civilians, so they are not professional military people. They are also those who if we compare, for example, some other crises where the ex-combatants who are returning back to the community may previously be fought against those community. And this is a specific, like precaution argument that the humanitarians are making, not to support ex-combatants in Ukraine. It's not the case. So the ex-combatants are the part of those communities. So this is an example where the principles should be nuanced in every context, and the humanitarian community has to have courage to start the discussion with local communities, local respondents, about to what extent the principles are relevant right now and what do they mean in this specific context. Over to you.
Thank you. I actually, I can back it up. The same for us, the experience of localization is the main learning experience. I think for us, it's the main learning experience is how actually the dynamic of the humanitarian response changes with time and what impact it has on the local actors and the response. So for example, maybe I will give the practical example. In the first months, we had organizations that from 10 people grew up to 200. And then at some point when the exit strategy started, there were some difficult practical, decision-making regarding now you have to cut down the half of the staff, while the needs are almost the same. Because this is also the thing. The exit strategy was not necessarily, because the needs has lowered so much, but it was the decision of the international actors to disengage, to leave Poland. And maybe in some way to, also put a pressure to the state actors to take over, while the state actors were also reluctant to fill this gap. So it is quite interesting in the practice how to answer, how to respond being tired, how to respond to the similar needs with half of the resources after 2-3 years. So I would say the learning opportunity was that we next time we will know what is the dynamic. Because this was actually, there is a quote in the report that localization is frustration. And I think this is very valid because there was this enchantment or relief when the international actors appeared at the borders within a week or two. We have quotes like that, INGOs were present over the border and everyone felt, okay, we're not with this alone. Especially because many of those actors were before at the Polish-Belarusian border when there was no one. So this experience was actually causing a lot of relief. But then suddenly the funds, sorry, I forgot the word, but like the funds were cut off. And right now, for example, right now, not only they cut off, but there was 50, 70, some organizations lost 50 to 70% of their funds for next year, and some bankrupted because of the freezing of US aid, while we still respond to 2 humanitarian crises at the very same time. So those nuances of localization, those practical implications, those humanitarian negotiations that we had to do, we've been doing this for the first time. And I think the main lesson learned is that now we as civil society also, but as many actors, we kind of know how much work it takes and what is the chronology of the crisis. To prepare, that preparedness is not just a nice word that has a blink to it, but also actually it has it is to be or not to be when it comes to the answering the needs. Yes, I think also we are right now learning how to scale down, but also scale down and not to over-exhaust ourselves. But it is, and this is something that is very present in the research, in the responses. It is a painful lesson because you have this humanitarian motivation, but at the very same time, many of the organizations, over 60% of the organizations that we discussed with, I mean, local organizations said, we are not able to, we don't want to continue the humanitarian, we don't want to be humanitarian in future. We want to come back to the original activities. Okay, last question to you, Maryana. I wanted to ask you, I will not ask you what has changed because we actually already discussed it. But I wanted to ask you, at the end of the report, there are some recommendations for different actors, what to do with those narratives. And is there a recommendation that you find particularly close to your heart onto reality you operate at? What recommendations you think maybe it's not the most important, but is something very relevant right now?
Yeah, I think one of the recommendations that I already touched earlier is this awareness about coexistence of vulnerability and resilience, and that the advocacy and communication should consider this coexistence and highlight that people who are affected by the war, they are, or they may be at the same time resilient and vulnerable, and some of their needs may be invisible because of these images of resilience and resistance.
Yes, I think this is a very good one. We didn't really discuss this, but there was this tension between those two images. For me, actually, this was something that we discussed a lot, and it's not very original, but it was original to me, about those international actors as active creators of narratives. This was something that we didn't really consider that much. How international actors, how private sector can, also for 2 years, we observed which actors create and which, for example, do not create narratives on purpose. Of course, we expected state actors, authorities to create narratives. We, as civil society, didn't really create the narrative. It was mainly a narrative. I would say that it was mostly the kind of the illustration of the narrative of solidarity and exceptionalism. But when it comes to the international actors, we didn't really expect that this narrative will be like that. And it is really interesting how strong the narrative of vulnerability was present. Because what we didn't mention also how gendered this response was. That over 70% of refugees coming from Ukraine were white women, children, also apart from the 70% minors, elderly people, people with disabilities. So first of all, there was this aspect of this narrative that I would be very open to call it, that was very racialized, that there was this aspect of familiarity, but at the very same time, this aspect of vulnerability, because those were the vulnerable groups that of course need the protection. And there was also this aspect of resistance that Maryana already mentioned, that also at the very same time, Ukrainian country, Ukrainian civil society is active, is not a victim, is a resistor against. So those three narratives played very well within this mobilization of resources for the donors, for the international organizations. But what we didn't expect is how much they shape this narrative. And sometimes how, I would say, in some cases, they cannot counter some narratives because they couldn't really counter the narratives of double standards. They couldn't really counter the narratives, anti-refugee narratives that were created in Polish case right now. Maryana, thank you very, very much for all of, we could discuss for hours, and we discussed for hours many times. I'm very, very grateful, and it was a pleasure to work with you. Do you have any words, final words?
No, I don't want to call that final words. This is a kind of the narrative. We should be precautious. No final words. Okay. Thank you all, and it was a pleasure to be part of this webinar.
Thank you very much. I will stay for 2-3 more minutes to answer your questions. If you have any, Maryana needs to go. Thank you and see you soon because you are already in Poland. Ciao, ciao.